Happy Friday and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live, presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. John Schmeelk, Lance Medow with you. The phone number, give us a call at 201-939-4513. Well, we have started our Pro Day series. Yesterday, Paul Dottino and Jonathan Casillas took the trip across Oregon, the lovely state of Oregon. I've
the
not
Oregon
had a chance
Trail.
to go and listen to that yet. No one, I believe, died of any diseases on the Oregon Trail, which has been known to happen for those of you that play the old computer game from the late 80s and early 90s. Trying to think of what some of the things you could catch on the Oregon Trail in that game was.
Well, I picture the horse and buggy ride, right?
Mm-hmm.
That
the
you took, the wagon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Boy, we're really testing the memory banks here. I wasn't mentally
It's been
prepared.
a while, I know.
I'm so involved in Texas prospects this morning and this afternoon that I put the Oregon Trail on the back burner. I'll have to get back to you next week.
And we are taking the Oregon Trail down to Texas in just a couple of minutes. We're going to be joined by Anwar Richardson, who covers Texas football for OrangeBloods.com, a former NFL reporter as well. And boy, you can tell why this team was able to make the college football playoffs. They have a lot of very good players, and that's with their quarterback Quinn Ewers staying back for another season. They have players on both sides of the ball coming out, could have as many as 3 or maybe even 4 first-round picks, depending on how the draft goes. So there'll be a lot to talk about with Anwar, and he is going to join us right now, or at least in a moment here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Pearson's going to get him on hold here, and we're going to talk some. And he used to cover the NFL, too, so he's a pretty good feel of how skill sets should transfer over to the National Football League. And now we are joined by the one and only Anwar Richardson. Again, he covers the Texas Longhorns, does a great job for OrangeBloods.com, former NFL reporter on the Bucks and Lions beat. Anwar, you got John Schmeelk and Lance Medow here on Big Blue Kickoff Live up here in New Jersey. I'm sure you're doing much better than the high of 42-degree weather we have up here in New York City.
I mean, listen, I'm suffering here in Austin, Texas. As you guys know, it's a place that no one ever wants to move to, right? It's only 64 today. The high will be 75. So I will suffer here for you guys, and as I go drop the top on the convertible and drive around today. So you guys, I'm not saying it's not a humble brag, but no, I appreciate it, man. Thank you for having me on. I grew up. I'll be honest with you. I grew up as a Giants fan. So you guys just thinking about being on the show today really took me down memory lane with some of my early memories when I started thinking about the Phil Simms and Joe Morris and Super Bowl 21 and Dave Meggett, right? And so I had a lot of good memories, and so just thinking of you guys actually put me in a very, very good mood today, so thank you.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in the Bronx.
Nice.
Oh, wow.
I did not know that. That's awesome. That's great. Lance and I are both Brooklyn guys.
Yeah. So we may have cut school and crossed paths around the same time, right? Yeah, but grew up in the arcades, the pizzerias, like all those kind of things, man. It was great memories. So yeah, when you grew up in New York, you got to choose one of them, right? You got to choose your baseball team, your football team, and your basketball team, right? So
well, I'm assuming you're a Yankees guy, given the fact that you grew up in the boogie down Bronx. I mean, that would be the biggest surprise of all if you shifted towards Mets territory after laying all that out.
The stadium is still, it always smelled to me whenever I went there. So I never was a huge fan of Shea Stadium. But I did like it, obviously, when Doc and Dwight were there. Those were fun to watch those guys for those years. But yes, Yankees, Giants, and of course Knicks. So that was my trifecta. But loved it. So like I said, you guys have put me in a fantastic mood today.
Well, we're excited to talk about Texas prospects, Anwar. We were saying right before we brought you on that it should surprise no one how Texas was able to get to the college football playoffs based on the number of NFL prospects they have coming out this year. Could have 3 first-round picks, maybe 4 if something weird happens in this year's draft. So why don't we start on offense, because I think that's where some of the top guys are situated maybe a little bit more heavily. And I want to start with A.D. Mitchell. I know a lot of people have the second wide receiver at LSU, Brian Thomas Jr., as wide receiver 4 in this draft. I have Adonai Mitchell. I think his combination of size, speed, and overall athleticism is off the charts. But I know maybe, and this comes from my film watching, not as consistent or as dominant as maybe those traits would dictate he should have been. So I'll start with that simple question. Why don't you think he was quite as dominant as maybe his traits should dictate?
You know what? Adonai Mitchell made an admission during the combine that I had never heard a single player say in probably maybe 30 years in this business. And he said, I never really ran full speed when I wasn't going to get the ball because I didn't want people to know how fast I was. I've never heard a person brag about, you know what, I kind of half-ass it sometimes, to be quite honest with you, as a point of pride. But that's what he said. So I think that has something to do with what you're pointing to, is that for whatever reason in his mind, he decided like he was going to pick and choose whenever he would go hard. Well, I think as you know, when you get to the next level, they will coach that out of you.
Oh yeah,
and they will tell you that's not what we're going to do here. Because he ran a 4.34 at the combine, and I didn't know that he actually was that quick. But he ran the 4.34, had a 39.5-inch vertical, 11.4 on the broad jump. So to your point, he's very athletic. He does have that size at that 6'2", 205. He's got an extensive route tree. He came from the University of Georgia, spent 1 year here at Texas, had a dynamic, impact while he was here. So I do believe that, when guys go and they look at the film, and that's obviously what'll count the most. They'll look at the film and they'll say incredibly productive. Did it against very good teams. So, Texas obviously played Alabama this season. They had the Big 12 schedule. Obviously, he was a guy that played extremely well against Washington, right? So, you know what you're going to get from this guy. And I just think the teams are going to look at him and say to themselves, you know what, we can get even more. The sky's the limit. And Steve Sarkisian, it helps that he's got an offense that translates to the NFL. And so because of that, I think people will say automatically, like, okay, that's a first-round guy. He won't be the first guy off the board, per se, for Texas, but he probably will be the first offensive player to go.
Anwar, as a follow-up, because, I find it fascinating that a player admits that he didn't go full speed when he wasn't getting the ball, because the first thing that comes to my mind is you're telling the defense, essentially, when you're not getting the football, if they know or they could sense that you don't have blazing speed. Have you heard any feedback from Texas coaches or anybody else that has spoken publicly since that was revealed, and whether or not that has presented perhaps more red flags or they've defended him actually subscribing to that school of thought?
I think it was a shoulder shrug when it was all said and done, and from the staff, and they still think that the film is good enough for him, and I think they still feel pretty solid that he's going to be a first-round pick. They feel like that's kind of a correctable thing, and like I said, never heard a person admit that, never. And I've heard people say a lot of crazy things. I was there, at a combine where, Manti Te'o had to answer for, a girlfriend who didn't exist. So I've seen it all. That was a first for me. But nonetheless, I think they shoulder shrug it and they feel pretty good that, overall, he'll still check all the boxes for teams and probably needs to go ahead and play hard on every single play.
Yeah, I would imagine so, and I'm sure that's a question he's going to. I'm sure when he does his 30 visits with NFL teams, that's going to be a very common question that he's asked by receivers coaches and head coaches when he's there. All right, I want to jump over to his other wide receiver, Xavier Worthy. I wasn't surprised he was the fastest receiver at the combine. I think the 4.21 number probably was like, okay, that's really, really fast. So that was impressive. But I don't want to talk to you about the speed, because I think we know the speed's there. We see it on tape. We know he's fast and he can win over the top. I have two questions. So this is a two-parter for you. One, the route tree. How much was he used on routes that go over the middle? Because, sometimes lighter guys get a little nervous when they have to go over the middle. They might have to deal with some contact. That's the first part of the question. And number two, did you see that 165-pound frame show up on tape? Because I got to be honest, when you watch him, I don't feel like he's a guy that plays to avoid contact. I think he did break some tackles to gain some yards after the catch on some of those stop routes. So that's my two-part question for him as I try to figure out how that frame and route tree might affect how teams evaluate him?
Great questions. So I will say this as relates to Xavier Worthy. The route tree is there. I would say this. He's no John Ross. Okay.
Good answer.
And so, and I think because that's what that would be my instant thought is,
right.
Okay, well, we're just John Ross, and you're going to be in and out of the league in a couple of years. He can run the routes. Okay, so he can go across the middle. He can definitely, obviously he can fly. We know that. But I don't think he's a person. He's never shied away. The thing I've always wondered is, okay, is this guy going to shy away from contact? I've never seen him shy away from contact. And I thought, okay, well, he's, 165. I mean, he's light in the butt. Of course, you're just going to get on the line of scrimmage and just push him around. But he's got that lean muscle. And some guys have just got that lean muscle. And you ever see, like, guys back in high school or something like that? They were thin, but they can do 100 push-ups.
Yep.
I think he's kind of like that on that route where you're not just going to just easily just knock him off the line of scrimmage and think to yourself, like, that's it. We're just going to sit on him within the next first 5 yards. The thing that Xavier Worthy does better than any receiver that I really have seen in recent years is he makes the hard thing look difficult. He makes the hard thing look easy. And that hard thing is getting open. And I know it sounds simplistic, right? But that's the hard thing. And when you look at him and you look at his film and if you go back and watch it, you'll see he has 5 yards of separation.
Oh, yeah.
6 yards of separation. Like before the ball is even there. And that's what he makes look easy. Before Quinn Ewers really kind of settled in a little bit last year, really, prior to that, Xavier Worthy had Casey Thompson as a quarterback, and then, of course, he had Hudson Card, he had Quinn Ewers. And some of the frustration that was happening for him early in his career, especially his freshman year, was that he was open a lot. And they couldn't get him the ball as often as they could. And so, so he's a guy that he can get open. He has some drops as a sophomore season, but when we end up finding out later, and then really after the season, is that he was playing that year with a broken hand. At least there was a broken bone in his hand. To what degree, we don't know. I don't believe it required surgery, but he did have a broken bone in his hand that came out later. So we know he was able to play through pain. He never complained about it. So the staff always loved that he was a good teammate as relates to that. Now, the thing about Xavier, he doesn't talk a lot. I think he's kind of come out of his shell a little bit more this year. But he's a good guy, a good locker room guy. I think he's a person that he won't be. My comparison for him is probably more like a Deshaun Jackson, if I have to think of a comparison.
That's a good one.
I think that's what I look at, like a smaller guy, but he'll get open. I think if you pair him with a bunch of other good receivers, and now you have that as a threat, I think that's where he needs to be. I don't necessarily look at him and say, okay, that needs to be your automatic number one. But if you pair him with somebody else, and especially if you got three, a good tight end, like a Kansas City might be a real, a good situation for him, guy like that. Tennessee, maybe potentially something like that. I think you'll really see something from him. But again, he's not a one-trick pony where that's all it's about. So I think I look at him as a late first, early second rounder, and I think if he finds a good home, he's a guy that can last for a long time in the league.
I want to stay with the receiving threats. Let's jump to tight end. Jatavian Sanders clearly is a weapon in its own right. Wasn't asked to block much, so one of the questions I have for you, Anwar, is his upside as a blocker, but I'm going to use the first-round picks that we've seen. I know he may be projected to go in the second round, but the Sam Laportas, the Dalton Kincaids last year, guys that made significant impacts on offense and made smooth transitions. Is he fall in that line where you could say, all right, hey, we're not drafting him to block, so let's not stress about it? Or do you see that they're going to need him to block based on his skill set, and therefore he'll have to show more in that department?
Here's the tricky part about Jatavian Sanders, and this will, all I know how to do is keep it a buck and keep it real. He at his pro day on the bench press, he benched it 8 times. 8 times. That, as you guys know, that's not good. That's not that is. It was only 8 reps on the bench press. He had a 29-inch vertical, only a 9.6 on the broad jump. And look, this is one of those things that we always know that teams will go back to the tape.
And which Anwar, by the way, is in line with his 40 time at the Combine. So that all kind of goes into the same bucket then, where the athleticism matches and it's not where teams want it to be.
I think, and that's where I think was. So I think he walked into this season and everyone's thinking, okay, he's probably the second tight end taken off the board, right?
Sure.
After the Georgia kid, he's supposed to be number 2. But he's not testing like that to me.
No.
I don't think, he's not testing like a guy that you want to take in the first round. I'm not quite sure about second round, if I'm just being a bucket and keeping it real with you guys. Like, I'd be, you GMs don't get fired for whiffing in the 7th round. But they do get fired for whiffing in the first round, okay? That's how you lose your job, is if you mess up your first-round pick. And especially the second-round pick is a commodity as well. So Ja'Tavion Sanders is going to have to be a guy that teams go back, they have to look at the film, and they're going to have to tell themselves, okay, we see enough on film there. Was he a dynamic blocker? Like, not necessarily, And so is he very athletic? Sure. But when you only throwing up 8 reps on the bench press, it's a red flag. It's a red flag to say, okay, is this guy putting in the work in the weight room? Is he putting in the work in the off season? The guy, this. You guys have done this for a long time. Teams want to minimize risk.
Yeah.
And so when I got to take a gamble on a guy, now I got to start thinking about, okay, is that going to be a 3rd round? If he slips to me, then maybe I'll take that gamble. Am I taking a gamble in the first? You don't want to do that. Am I taking a gamble early in the second? Probably not so much. So Ja'Tavion Sanders is a guy that I think he's going to have a team that really has convinced themselves that what they're seeing from an athletic standpoint, they can coach certain things or coach certain things up, which is a real surprise because honestly, he was a 5-star coming out of high school. And so but the numbers that he's put up are just not impressive to me. And so he's a guy that 2nd round, day 3, I think that's probably, that's probably where he probably needs to be, maybe 3rd round-ish, somewhere in that, just based off how he's been testing.
Just to dig into that answer a little bit, Anwar, to follow up on Lance asked you, I know he's not a guy that's known for his blocking. Is he a willing blocker that's a try-hard guy and, maybe doesn't have the physical ability to block some of those bigger defensive ends? Or is he a guy that you're going to have to coax the want and the effort out of him to participate in the run game?
I mean, he can block, but, I mean, dude, when you're throwing up 8 reps on the bench press,
no, I hear you.
You ain't going to be blocking for long, That's what that thing is for people don't understand. The bench press is you got to push off. You got to push. Like, how many times can you do that? And so, can you get him a little bit stronger? So, I mean, he was able to come in there as a blocker. Gunnar Helm, one of the other tight ends, was really good at the blocking situation as well. But guys, I just again, as much as I talked up Adonai, as much as I talked up Xavier, I'm a little bit more lukewarm on Ja'Tavion just because of how he's testing. So, can he block? I guess, but now that I see the numbers, it makes me want to go look back. I'll say this: at no point in the season did I ever view him as a liability as a blocker. Okay. So I will say that. So I never viewed him as a liability. But the way he's testing on the next level, he tests as a guy that would be a liability.
Well, that's why the Combine gives you some more food for thought based on what you've seen on film. There's no doubt about that. Let's stay on the 100%. Offensive side of the ball. Jonathan Brooks is intriguing to me, Anwar, because the sample size is tiny, but the sample size is pretty damn impressive. And I understand when you're playing behind Bijan Robinson and Rashawn Mitchell, okay, you're not going to get on the field much, but Rashawn Johnson, excuse me, went to the Bears. But I guess the question is then, if I'm a general manager, is that a flash of what we saw this past season, or is that just all of a sudden him getting fortunate because of all the talent around him at Texas. How do you interpret that to try to get a better read on where he profiles and where he fits on the NFL level?
It was really interesting when Texas lost a guy like Bijan Robinson. The thought was, well, you're not going to find anybody to replace him, right? And then Brooks comes in and through 10 games had rushed for 1,039 yards and 10 touchdowns. His numbers were comparable to where Bijan was, and in some areas they were actually better through that stretch of time, right? It was neck and neck and sometimes better in certain categories. The big thing that Brooks is facing to me is that he's coming off the ACL. So he did have the ACL injury, and he's a guy that more than likely you probably won't have until training camp. He's a guy you draft him. He's doing nothing during your rookie minicamp. You keep him light work during your OTAs. And really, training camp is when you probably try to unleash him a little bit more, and you probably let him go slowly. He from a stat standpoint, he was the number one guy in the country for a large portion of the season and the best running back in the country. You just got to feel comfortable. So when you talk about the combine and you talk about food for thought, what the medicals look like, that's going to be a huge thing for him. And when teams bring him in and analyze him as well, that's what's going to be is like, hey, can he make a 100% recovery? If he can, and they feel really good about taking him, again, you're probably not taking him in the first round. You probably was maybe taking him in the second round at some point and seeing what he can do. But I think, you take him in the second round and you store him for training camp, then I think you're good to go. If he slips a little bit further down just because of the knee and concerns about the knee, I think teams will be happy, and I think teams will be satisfied. Again, you don't really want it. Running backs are going to be banged up.
Sure.
And so, for the most part, you're not going to have a lot of running backs that live to that second contract anyway. So if you can find a guy who's serviceable the way I think he would be, again, not only he's a good blocker, he's got breakaway speed. The interesting thing about the whole story about Jonathan Brooks is that he didn't start the season as the starting running back. There was a freshman out of Florida by the name of T.J. Baxter. He was actually going to be the starting running back. He was the starting running back. He got banged up, and Brooks comes in as the backup and then has this kind of season that he had.
Wow.
So Brooks is finding himself in a good situation. I think he'll be good. I think he'll be serviceable on the next level. But again, to me, the big thing is the ACL. And how do they feel about that? And they feel like, it's all good. Then, yeah, I think he'll be fine and serviceable. But, again, it may take a little bit of time before he's ready to go.
Last offensive player I want to touch on real quick, Anwar. Okay. Again, we're joined by Anwar Richardson, covers Texas, does a great job. I liked what I saw from Christian Jones at the NFL Combine. At the Senior Bowl, pardon me. I thought when they tried to move him into guard, he struggled a little bit, which I think makes sense because he was a tackle. But I think when he was out there, and I think they had him mostly at right tackle in the Senior Bowl, and I think that's where Texas played him too. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought he was, maybe not the elite athlete you're looking at there, but I feel like he was really, really good in Mobile, and I think as a early day 3 pick, as a guy you can develop into maybe a swing tackle down the road, I think he could be a valuable player in the NFL.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. The thing is that so he ends up being one of these guys who was a super senior that because of the COVID was able to come back for an additional year. So he's going to be a little bit of an older guy, that's come in here. He's a guy that was developed by Kyle Flood, the offensive, not only co-offensive coordinator, but also the offensive line coach here. And yes, he tested well at the Combine. He's a big guy. I think the thing with him is that he played right tackle in college. And so because as a right tackle, obviously, you said you want to swing guys. And so he's not going to be a guy that can play the left.
Good
so
point.
You're going to have a position of need for where he's at the moment. So that's why I say he's probably a day 3-ish kind of guy that you can throw in at that right tackle position specifically, right?
Yep.
because it's okay to have a left tackle that you move over to right, but if he's primarily right with not really being strong at the left, I think that limits his options just a little bit. But I think he'll come in. I think he'll be productive. I think his best years are ahead of him. He really wasn't that – I'll be honest with you. He wasn't that effective for the first few years. And then it's almost like the last 2 years is when he really took off. And last year was a really great year for him. So I like him as like I said, a day 3 guy. You get a guy like that in the 4th, 5th round, something to that effect. If you slip to the 6th, that's a great thing. But you get him in that 4th, 5th, then he's a guy that I feel like could be, a solid contributor on your team at some point.
As a quick follow-up to that, I mean, I was reading that he played left tackle his true junior year in 2021, struggled immensely, and I figure, Anwar, that's why they said, all right, we're going to move you back to right after he started on the right side previously. So I guess what I'm saying is, we've had conversations here with the Giants, Evan Neal, who actually was with Kyle Flood at Alabama, whether or not you can easily flip a guy. And Anwar, it seems as if it comes back to footwork. I'm curious what you've seen out of his footwork and whether or not that bodes better for him as a run blocker as opposed to a pass protector on the next level.
I think his footwork is good. He's one of these guys that he's one of these guys that played soccer when he was younger. So and obviously got bigger. So it was kind of hard to continue to do that. But his roots are soccer, and so if you believe, and I'm always a guy that I love 2-sport guys, especially the guys that play football. I love guys who play soccer. I love guys who play basketball.
Or by the way, wrestle for our offensive linemen too. I love that too.
Yes. Yeah. If you're a wrestler as an offensive lineman, stuff like that. Yeah. When we grew up, where being a 2-sport and 3-sport athlete was kind of the norm, as opposed to doing this specialization all the time. So because he has a soccer background, he does have that footwork that I think you're talking about, that footwork that you need. Like you said, left tackle, no. he's not going to make a living in the NFL as a left tackle. He won't be around. I know it's not for long. He won't be there for long. Right tackle where he is, the footwork is there. Like I said, I think he's getting better. I think as now, because Kyle Flood, they've only been there. That was only their 3rd season, right? And so, so they had a year to kind of develop him and then be able to use him over the last 2 years. And Kyle Flood has done a hell of a job. He's getting a lot out of him. And I think there's be another coach. And by the way, incredibly bright guy. And I know that's always usually the case for offensive linemen. Incredibly bright. He's a sponge. I think he'll be a hard worker for somebody. So I think the talent is there. I think the future is bright because I think he's only starting now to tap into his potential.
All right, Anwar, let's switch to defense. I don't want to start with Byron Murphy just because I don't think the Giants are going to be in a position to take him. We can get a little thumbnail on him a little bit later. But Devondre Sweat, I think, is someone that will land either in the 2nd or early 3rd round. And to me, the bottom line with him is his weight, right? We know what he can do as a run stopper. He's a plugger. He's not a big upfield pass pressure type of guy. But he weighed in at 366 at the NFL Combine. He did not have his weight announced at the Senior Bowl. Whether or not he stepped on the scale and is a matter of debate. But I would imagine the number was much higher than that 366 that he weighed in at the Combine.
Yes.
So how much have you seen that weight fluctuate, and how much of a worry is that, along with the motor that goes along with it, going to be for NFL teams when they watch his tape and they talk to the kid?
I mean, it should be a concern. I mean, like he got down to that weight for the Combine. That means we're talking about a guy that was in the 370s throughout the season. I mean, at the end of the day, and again, I love talking to you guys, but I gotta keep it real. Like you don't see that many productive defensive linemen who are closing in on 400 pounds. Like that's just not the NFL, right? That's not how this thing goes, right? And so the question and the challenge is, okay, if we give this guy, by the way, let me find this thing out. This is the most fascinating thing. Let me find this when he signed, by the way, at Texas. Hold on, I'm looking this up right now. He was a defensive tackle. Okay, here we go. You ready for this?
Yeah.
He committed to Texas in 2018. He was part of the 2019 class. When he committed to Texas, he was 6'4" and 265 pounds.
Oh my gosh!
Class of 2019. He has gone over 370 at this moment.
He's grown another person essentially.
So so if you're an NFL team, you got to say, man, this guy's gained over 100 pounds in college. What's he going to do when he not an NIL contract? What's he going to do when he has a pro contract and has the abilities to just go out? Can we trust this guy in the offseason, right? Do you have to put weight stipulations in his contract? Like those kind of things that, you're starting to wonder about. Is he a hell of a football player on a college level? Absolutely. You go back, whether it's Murphy or you go back to Sweat, you go back, and if there's a game you want to turn on the film, you turn on the film for Texas versus Alabama of this past year. And you're going to see something that you don't see, and you very, very rarely saw in the Nick Saban era, which was you saw a team go up to Tuscaloosa and bully around the University of Alabama. They beat them by double digits, and guys like Tavondre Sweat, Byron Murphy were dominant in that game against a very good Alabama team, a team that went to the playoffs, right? So he's got the ability, right? But no one's questioning his ability. No one's going to question him as a player. But then on this next level, are you simply a two-down guy? Right, but you can't because we know because of that weight. I think he ran like what he ran like a 5. It was somewhere in the 5s of what he ended up running in
5'3" or 5'4", I think, something like that.
Yeah. So we know when a guy gets past your running back, you're out of that play.
Yeah, 5'2", 5'2" he ran.
Okay, 5'2", So a running back gets past you, you're out of the play, right? You're ineffective. You're not going to be close to getting back into that play. That's the question. And so I think the question really becomes the weight. Can he get that thing under control? It's going to be a question. Can he play? Absolutely. But how effective can he be? How's that going to look like for him in the fourth quarter? He wasn't fatigued in games in college, but you're not playing against the TCUs and the Baylors of the world and Oklahoma States. Like, you're going against grown men who are very strong, who know how to sit down a big guy like that. That's my thing with Tavondre. If he can get that weight under control, I feel like if he can get somewhere in the 350s, 340s, and now all of a sudden you're cooking with grease. But when you're close to 400, man, it's gonna be the thing I think that has him down as a day 2 guy just because of that weight.
Well, Anwar, I was told Adonai Mitchell said that Sweat didn't show his true speed when he knew that the runner wasn't coming towards him. So maybe that was why, we get a true idea of what he could do. There's no concern over his conditioning. Absolutely. I want to bring Murphy into the conversation. I know John mentioned that, maybe the Giants won't be in position to grab him, but I want to sort of draw a comparison between Murphy and Sweat. I think if you look at their numbers, you say, wow, they weren't big sack guys, but they're more than just getting to the quarterback on, where it's about what they create for others, the ability to clog the hole, stop the run. And I've heard Aaron Donald's name being thrown around in terms of comparisons for Murphy, but Donald, obviously, who just retired, a huge sack guy. So with Murphy, even though he has a significant impact on a game without necessarily getting to the quarterback and finishing, where do you see his ceiling about if you do want to get more pass rush and finish out of him, where he could potentially take that?
He does. He's one of those guys that I would say, like, to your point, he does those things that you don't see from the stat standpoint. But when you're talking about being down there, stopping in the run, I'll give you a stat that will help you understand Murphy. You have to draw a little bit of a correlation here, but I think you guys can do it. Okay, Texas last year ranked 2nd in the country in opponent third down conversion.
Wow.
Nobody converted against Texas on third downs. The only team that was better than them in the country last year was Georgia. Outside of that, out of 177 attempts against Texas, only 47 times was that converted. That third down conversion led to a first down. What that means is guys like a Murphy, guys like Sweat were effective at getting to the quarterback, at stopping the run, right, and being effective in those areas. And so because he did test so well at the combine, first of all, he ran a 4.87, which is, at 300, at almost 300 pounds. He weighed in at 297 and ran a 4.87. That's a hell of a lot of talent. And I remember when I covered the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for years. Before I started doing college football, I was an NFL writer. I covered the Bucs and the Lions. I worked at Yahoo for a period of time covering the entire NFL. And I remember when I covered the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and John Gruden was the coach there. And one of the things that he told me was before one of the drafts, and he said, listen, when you find an athletic 300-pound man, you have to draft him. He said, when you find someone who's that athletic at 300 pounds, whether it's offensive line, whether it's defensive line, you have to draft them because there are not a lot of athletic 300-pound men walking the face of the earth.
Am I guessing that's the year they drafted Warren Sapp?
That was it. Tony Dungy was a part of that one. So, but
that's right. It was
after that, but nonetheless. It makes all the sense in the world. So when you see a guy like Byron Murphy, first of all, when we think about what most 300-pound men look like when we walk into the malls or anywhere else, like they're not that athletic, right? So when you have a guy who is at, a 4.87, on the 40-yard dash, I think on the bench press he did 28 reps at the combine. So and he did 33 on the vertical jump. So a guy like that, NFL team is going to look like and say he's got all the athleticism in the world, and now he wasn't necessarily asked to be that person to attack the quarterback and sack the quarterback because we want you to make fill these gaps and let our back seven do all the work for you, and he did it at a high rate. So he's the guy that people look at as a top 15 kind of guy, maybe top 10-ish potentially. You never know what team is going to fall in love with him. But that's how good he is. He's going to be probably, if not, the first defensive tackle that comes off the board. If not, he'll be in the top two.
I know we've gone long here, Anwar, so I'll close with this. Anyone that we didn't mention that you really like, that you think people in the NFL draft community and NFL front offices are underrating a lot based on what you saw from them at Texas?
I think you guys covered, the most of them. I think Jalen Ford is a linebacker who I think will be productive for a team. I think a guy who's going to be just sneaky, just file him away. Maybe he's a late round pick if he's drafted at all, but I think he'll make a team as a special teams guy. Is Keelan Robinson? He's a backup running back for Texas, Keilan. But I think he ran about a 4.42. But I want to say at his pro day, he's not the biggest guy, but I want to say at his pro day, I think he did over 20 reps on the bench.
Wow.
And I want to say he's a guy maybe he's like a 5'9"-ish kind of kid. As I mentioned, Dave Megan, right? But I think he was like a 5'9"-ish guy. He's tremendous on special teams. One of the things he did incredibly well on special teams is he was very good at blocking kicks and blocking field goals. Just really talented. So he's a guy that I think he'll get on a team. I think he'll find a home somebody. I think he'll be a special teams guy. And I think a guy that in a few years you'll hear about him as a gadget guy. But just file Keelan Robinson away as, again, if you just want to be the smartest guy in the room in 3 years from now, bring up his name, and everyone's like, how the heck did you know about that guy? He's a guy that I think he's going to make it as a special teams guy and be incredibly effective. And it's the last thing I want to say before we run. And by the way, I appreciate you guys having me on. This won't be the last time that you and I talk. Steve Sarkisian, when he got here, they didn't have anybody drafted, not a single player that's drafted. You mentioned they're sending 11 guys to the combine this year. There's been a real huge development of talent, especially as they go into the SEC. They've been trying to shape and mold bodies to go and be productive and be able to compete against SEC players. And so you're going to see probably more of an impact from Texas, and you're probably going to see more guys starting to go to the combine and hear more names called. So just as we start, we think of the Georgias of the world, and you think of the Bamas of the world. Of course, Michigan sent half their damn team to the combine. It seems like going forward, when you start thinking about some of the turnover and transitions that have happened in college football, Texas has been doing really well from a recruiting standpoint, not only high school, but from the transfer portal. Clearly, there's enough money in Texas for NIL for them to attract guys. I mean, there's no shortage of millionaires in this state. And so just keep an eye on Texas going forward and start going forward. There's been no reason to pay attention to Texas for many, many years, but I've sensed a shift here. And I think this draft will be kind of the start of you starting to see them more consistently and more consistent names in the NFL as well. Just want to make sure I point that out.
Well, and if Sweat is not around anymore, there'll be more food to pass around, too, at the buffet. So you'll be able to feed the team.
Brisket, baby.
Yeah. Texas barbecue for everybody, baby. Let's lock it in. Anwar, tell your boys in the Bronx where they can find your work before we say goodbye.
For anybody who's still down there in the boogie down, it's real simple. It's Anwar Richardson, Anwar Richardson. That's how you can find me on Twitter. You can follow me. I'm not one of these people who tweet 15, 16 times a day. I don't think what I have to say is that important. So when I do tweet, don't worry about me me flooding your inbox, or you have to turn off notifications. So just follow me, ANWAR, and I tweet about lots of different things. But that's how you can find me. I do shows on YouTube, but that's the easiest way to get me.
Awesome. Anwar, great stuff, man. Enjoy the rest of what I'm sure is a busy offseason down there in Texas. I'm sure you have the spring stuff all starting up pretty soon. And but by what you're saying, it sounds like we'll talk again next year. Appreciate the time, man.
Yeah, thanks, Anwar.
All right, guys. No problem. You guys take care.
Always fun to talk to a guy from the Bronx, Anwar Richardson. Again, you can find his work at orangebloods.com. Lance, needless to say, a lot of really good players coming out of Texas. We could have 6 or 7 picks here in the first 2 rounds alone.
Yeah, it speaks volumes of the substance, I think, that's coming out of the program, and that goes back to what Anwar Richardson had to say, how things have drastically changed since Sarkisian has taken over the program. Clearly, the biggest talk is about the interior defensive linemen, specifically Murphy and Sweat. I think if you look at today's NFL, John, we're starting to see interior defensive linemen can have an impact, even if they don't necessarily get 15 sacks a season. And these two guys fit within that profile because they're really good run stoppers, and if they could collapse the pocket, I mean, Murphy's a powerful guy. You watch him on film, John. I saw him push back just about every single offensive lineman
and
that challenged
quick, too.
him.
He's a good athlete.
Very shifty. Mm-hmm. So teams are going to say, we could bring him in the mix, and then everybody else is going to eat as a result of that. So
I'd actually love to put him next to Dexter Lawrence. I don't think the Giants are in a position where, because he's probably going to get picked somewhere between like 10 and 20 or 15 and 25, so the Giants won't be in a position there. But his size profile next to Dexter as an up-the-field guy, perfect fit.
And the athleticism that he brings to the table, too, because, we're not talking about a guy that's in the 300-pound ballpark. He's right at the edge, so that still gives him some movement and flexibility. So those are two powerful guys that, if they could stay healthy, they could prove to be 3-down linemen. There's extreme value to have them. And then as far as the offensive side of the ball, there's speed, there's versatility. Now, I'm not overly concerned about Jonathan Brooks, the running back, his ACL, and the reason being, John, it's not a lot of mileage on the tires. So if you're an NFL front office, you say, hey, if he played full 3 years of college ball and was up there in carries, then he tears his ACL, to me, that'd be a red flag. Not so much the case that he's only coming off of 1 year where he's in triple digits of carries. And as far as Worthy is concerned, the wide receiver, he flourished as a slant guy. So if you're looking for that complimentary wide receiver and you want to bring somebody in on the slot who's not going to get a lot of attention because you have size on the outside, even though he's got a small frame. Heck, we talked about this with Devontae Smith, who went to the Eagles. And how many years did we talk about? How many games? Oh, this is going to be it. And he held up for the most part. So I don't get that concerned, especially if you're not going to give him an overwhelming amount of targets day in and day out. So I think Worthy, to me, and Brooks, may not go early, but I think anybody that winds up with them is going to really like how they could be that complementary piece to the lineup.
I'll be curious to see if Worthy can sneak into the first round as NFL teams become more comfortable with smaller and slighter wide receivers. Look what Tank Dell did, for example, last year.
Good example for the Texans.
But then again, people say, well, we told you Tank Dell wouldn't stay healthy because he's only 165 pounds, and lo and behold, he ended up getting hurt at the end of the year. So I still think there's a push and pull there with the smaller wide receivers. I'm curious to see if Worthy can sneak into round one. I do think A.D. Mitchell will end up being a first-round pick given his profile, size, speed, athleticism.
I'm worried about what Anwar said. I mean, that to me is scary, that he wasn't going full speed on plays where he knew he wasn't getting the ball. How many times you watch an NFL game, I see a wide receiver either on the backside or the front side of the play, and he's just, holding the guy in front of him, but you could tell he has no interest or passion.
It happens all the time.
It happens a lot, I'll give you that, but if you already have that mindset going into the NFL...
Not what you want.
Well, because here's the thing. Coaches and players are great at film study in this day and age. Mm-hmm. They'll pick up those tendencies in the snap of a finger. That worries me, because even if he gets with a great coaching staff, can you coach that out of a player if they've already adopted that
in college
so early in their football career?
No, I totally agree. All right, 201-939-4513. Real quick, go subscribe to the Giants Huddle podcast. 2 good episodes up there right now. Sean O'Hara from a couple days ago, then former NFL general manager Randy Mueller. Really fun conversation. He loved the Giants all in free agency. We did a breakdown on the draft prospects as well, what the Giants might do at 6. A lot of quarterback talk, a lot of wide receiver talk. So go tune into the Giants Huddle podcast. Giants.com, Giants mobile app. Favorite podcast platform. You can find Draft Season, our draft podcast there as well with Tony, Pauline, and I. Right now we're kind of going through team needs and ideal picks for each team since we have a better idea of what these rosters look like after free agency. All right, let's get to the phones at 201-939-4513. Tyler in Long Beach will lead us off. Hi, Tyler.
Hey, John. Hey, Lance. How you guys doing?
We're good.
Doing all right.
What's going on? I would like to see the Giants take a similar approach to the draft as the Packers did last year. The Packers double up on 2 positions, wide receivers, tight end, and they let Matt LaFleur go to work. I think it's an approach that the Giants should look at. Just go a little heavier on offense. Let Brian Daboll do what he does best. Think that second-round pick might be a sweet spot for a defensive need, whether it's a tackle, if we could get Hall if he slips from Ohio State, or another big corner to put opposite Deontay Banks. But I think it was just very beneficial for the Packers last year. It led to a lot of Jordan Love's success, what he had surrounded to him. And their playoff run, a lot of those guys were, contributors on offense, Musgrave, Kraft, Jaden Reed, obviously, and then Wicks down the stretch. So I would like to see the Giants go heavy on offense this year.
Do you want to draft 2 wide receivers, Tyler? Because I actually got a tweet about this the other day, and I replied that I'm not sure I would double up in wide receiver in this draft, especially if you use your 6th overall pick on a wide receiver, because you already have Hyatt, who's been in the league only 1 year, Wan'Dale Robinson, who's been only in the league for 2 years. You still have Darius Slayton under contract. He's not an older player. I'm not sure if you want to use, like a 5th or 6th round pick maybe on a wide receiver.
Hodgins,
okay,
too.
I'm fine with that. But I'm not sure I would use 2 premium picks on a wide receiver just because I don't think they're going to get on the field much.
For sure. I wouldn't say that I'm saying double up on the positions, but I would like to see an offensive approach, even if it's, like you were talking about with Christian Jones before.
Yep.
Just heavy offense.
I agree with you.
Maybe it's a premier wide receiver, hopefully, but I would like to see a running back, maybe Blake Corum in like the 3rd or 4th. We need contributors on the offensive side of the ball. For the last 3 years, we've had nothing. And I would just like to see them go heavy on offense, whether it's a tackle, guard, center, whatever it is. I think that a lot of their focus this year should be on offense.
Well, it's going to be interesting in terms of the offensive line because, they've brought in, 5 offensive linemen already. And let's face it, all these guys are not making the roster. They're going to compete, and they're going to let the best man win. And you've got some young guys that were hurt last year who you did draft recently that you're hoping maybe can stay healthy and battle. I'm just concerned if you start doubling and tripling up on some of these positions, there's not going to be enough roster spots for a lot of these guys.
Yeah,
you have to take that into consideration.
1 receiver, 1 tight end, 1 offensive lineman. If you kind of work it like that, I think you can work. I think that would be all right. But yes, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, that's how I probably should have phrased it. But, a tight end is probably going to be positional need as well. So a tight end, running back, someone on the line, and then maybe wide receiver at the first. I think that's, and then I also think that 2nd-round pick is where we're going to probably look for a defensive need or, obviously best player available teamed up with, positional need. But I do think a majority of this draft should be offensive.
No. Fair point.
Just real quickly, last caller used the Packers. The Packers have a track record of building their team through the draft. They do not usually go out and serve as aggressors in free agency. Now, they did that a little bit this offseason.
Jacobs, McKinney.
Correct. But that was a rare occurrence, John. Yep. So Green Bay's a good example, but they've built a blueprint that says we're going to put all of our resources into the draft. We're going to develop. And keep in mind, the reason why I also think Green Bay's a good example is you were transitioning to a young quarterback, John. And to me, it's important in the NFL. You want the offensive personnel to grow together. So now you have Jordan Love simultaneously moving up the ladder with a young core, meaning guys are going to be on similar contracts. You hope to keep that group together. Giants are not necessarily in the same ballpark. Now, could they draft a quarterback at 6? Perhaps, but there's still no guarantee that quarterback gets on the field immediately. So you'd still have a veteran in Daniel Jones, or if you go with Drew Lock, who's only on a 1-year deal, trying to grow up with a younger core. You're not necessarily on the same page as you are in Green Bay. I just think that's something else to not overlook and dismiss, that just because one team did it right doesn't mean the Giants are in the same position to adopt that.
Agreed. And just real quick on your offensive line point, Lance, I think it's a good one. Here are the offensive linemen current on the Giants roster, okay? This is based off the recent moves and off the Giants roster page on the website. Jermaine Illuminor.
That's one.
Josh Azudu. You can count for me. Marcus McKeithen. Aaron Stinney. Those are all new additions. Evan Neal, Andrew Thomas. Let me see. I guess they have guard under G, huh? I was looking for O. And then inside, they have John Runyon. And how do they have this thing arranged here? Center. Okay, John Michael Schmitz. And then I guess Matt Nelson is the newest guy that's got added, right?
Former Lion.
Doesn't look like he's been added to the roster page yet. So those are the guys that I see on the roster right now. So I guess it's understandable why they wanted to add some bodies there. And if you want to look at the guys on futures contracts, Lance.
Well, I was going to say,
real
quick, I didn't mean to cut you off. I don't think you mentioned Austin Schlottman.
No, I guess he hasn't been added to the roster page yet.
10.
That's another one.
Okay.
And then they have Jalen Mayfield and Joshua Miles as well.
That's 12.
As guys that were on the practice squad. So you're looking at probably 9 or 10 offensive linemen on the opening day roster. Probably 9 is more realistic. Yeah, maybe 8. So it's a lot of people in the building right now.
Yeah, and once again, nobody's guaranteed to have a roster spot, even some of these guys they brought in free agency. But unless you're taking an offensive lineman, John, in the first 2 rounds, you're bringing in a mid-round, late-round guy. Yeah, he's going to come and he's going to compete. But once again, I don't know if he's going to have enough time to make enough of an inroad to solidify a roster spot. And you may be better off using your draft capital on somebody that has a more legitimate shot to get on the field and develop, so that you're not waiting till year 4 of the rookie contract to determine whether or not you want to re-sign the guy.
All right, let's go to James in Georgia. He's up next. Hi, James.
Hey, what's going on, guys?
What's up?
I know sometimes I call, and my call can be a little everywhere, so let me try to focus a little bit. Who do you think, if the draft doesn't go well for us and we're not able to land a quarterback, one of the top 6 quarterbacks, in my opinion, right? Who do you think free agency-wise is going to be available and make sense money-wise as a camp body? Because, again, we're going to need camp bodies just to hold practice before the season starts. And do you think that they will, aggressively draft somebody no matter what to help that situation? Or if the draft doesn't fall our way and we don't get one of those top 6 guys, from Caleb Williams to Bo Nix, that we will look towards the backside of free agency?
Good question. And James, appreciate the call. Thank you as always. And Pearson, we could try to squeeze one more in here if you want. Looking at the free agency list here.
I mean, I have it up here, John. I mean, they could very well bring in a veteran. But, I mean, I would think between Drew Lock and Tommy DeVito, you can give those guys plenty of work.
Usually you like to have a third arm in the spring.
But, I mean...
And, Daniel, they did point out that Daniel might be able to do some non-contact stuff throwing the ball. Has someone signed Rudolph yet? Mason Rudolph?
Mason Rudolph, yes, went to Tennessee.
Been signed. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you still got the guys that you have out there, Ryan Tannehill, Brian Hoyer.
Yeah, I don't think Tannehill
Nate
would be a guy.
Sudfeld.
I think Hoyer's going to retire.
Carson Wentz is still out there. Kyle Allen. Dobbs signed with the Niners.
Oh, did he?
Yeah,
All right, that
Dobbs
wasn't
not there.
updated on this page then.
If I'm the Giants, I would think if you don't draft a guy, John, and if you disagree, that's fine. You're looking, I think, maybe at this stage, somebody who's a little bit younger.
I agree.
Right? Who you can still develop and evaluate their arm. So I'll give you an example.
And I would say, he said top 6 quarterbacks. I think your third camp body might be like a 5th or 6th round quarterback then. If you don't get one of the
very
top
well
6,
do that.
Drafted Devin Leary or someone like that, and on day 3, that can be your third arm in camp.
Sure.
Because you already have your veteran lock. You don't need another veteran.
No, but if you want it, that's why I'm saying you find the best of both worlds. You find somebody that was already drafted but is still young enough that can still develop. So the few guys that I'm looking at, you've got Easton Stick, who is the Chargers' backup to Justin Herbert. He's 28 years old and clearly barely got on the field, given who was in front of him. John Wolford, the former Ram who filled in when Goff and Stafford got banged up. He's also in that 28-year-old ballpark. Tyler Huntley, actually, is out there. I don't think he signed, but let me just confirm.
He did not,
right?
I believe.
The former Baltimore Raven I'm talking about that backed up Lamar Jackson. All of those guys are in the age bracket where they're not in their 30s, and maybe you could still get a little bit more out of them in terms of their development. So those are the veterans that I would look at if you still want to bring in somebody after the draft.
I think Easton Stick is still Chargers property.
He still is? Because I'm looking at him.
He's
on my list here as a free agent, but maybe he did sign.
Them.
It's possible.
I could be wrong about that. I believe he is on the Chargers roster page. Or was it Jacob Eason that signed somewhere? It was either Easton Stick or Jacob Eason. I always get those two guys confused. One of those two guys signed somewhere. I'm trying to remember.
Let's see. Stick was a 5th-round pick in 2019. So 19, 20, 21, 22. Clearly, did he sign a short-term deal? He signed a 1-year deal in 2023 to stay with the team.
On the
and
Chargers
then March
roster
16th,
page.
he re-signed. Okay, I didn't see that. So that was a few days ago. So take Easton Stick's name off the board.
How could you not know exactly what Easton Stick signed? I mean, my God.
Yeah, I know.
It's essential to the NFL.
Well, I didn't get alerts on my phone, so I apologize. Yeah.
What, you mean Tom Pelissero was sending out alerts about which agent negotiated that contract on Twitter? No?
I know. Yeah, apparently that wasn't a priority tweet. But see, this is another example of why, I bring up my list of free agents here, and sometimes they don't update this accordingly.
Same thing. That's why I thought Josh
I'm still seeing his name, and then clearly he's off the board. So more of a reason why everybody should be careful when you look at various web pages, because sometimes they're not updated religiously.
If I asked you right now, what's the Giants' 5 starting offensive linemen next year, and in what positions?
5 starting offensive linemen. Okay, let me bring up my chart because I just like to visualize it. So I'll go Andrew Thomas, left tackle.
That's bold.
I know.
Okay.
Well, listen, you told me all 5, so I'm going to start with the obvious and go accordingly. From that standpoint, I'll go with John Runyon at left guard. Okay. And I know he's played both, but he did say on a conference call he prefers left.
Yep.
So I'll stick with that. John Michael Schmitz at center. The mystery right now is the right guard position, because you have a few different options. So here's where I'll go with right now. I'll go with Jermaine Illuminor at right guard and then Evan Neal at right tackle.
That's what I have
to start.
That's what I have to.
All bets are off, though, based on what happens in terms of training camp. But right now, I'm going to give Neal the benefit of the doubt. New offensive line coach, healthy, that he will do everything to solidify that job. And the good news is Illuminor has versatility where he can play inside and outside.
To your point, Evan Neal, I think we're at the point now in year 3. That's a job he's going to have to play well enough to keep, especially with Jermaine Illuminor on the roster, a guy that started for the Giants offensive line coach for 2 years in Vegas and did a yeoman's work. Was a solid, average NFL starter, right? I think
especially
he did a nice
as a run
job.
blocker.
Yeah, he did a good job. So he's going to have to earn that spot. This is my sense, and why would you bring in a guy like Illuminor if it wasn't that Joe Shane said it at his postseason press conference. Evan Neal has to play better. And I think that's where we're at. I think he has it in him. I think he can do it, but he's going to have to do it. And I wouldn't be shocked, Lance. And I don't think any decisions will be made in the spring because pads aren't on, so you can't really see these guys truly play offensive line until you get to the summer. But I think once we get 2 weeks into training camp and you get into that first joint practice against that other team before the first preseason game, if they haven't seen what they want to see, maybe that's when we can start maybe seeing a shift there. If Illuminor moves out to right tackle, he moves into guard or something like that to try to figure out what the best fit is on that side of the line.
Well, and here's the other thing. Normally when we talk about offensive linemen, John, we say if somebody doesn't win a starting job, you like that they can be insurance elsewhere. Neal doesn't have that positional flexibility.
I mean, he started left tackle in college.
Well, but I guess it's more of he'd be the swing tackle. I'm talking about could guard be an option, I guess is what I was thinking more.
He has some guard experience in college, but it's a long time ago.
Yeah, and, once again, do they feel comfortable with him as opposed to a Stinney or a Schlotman who they brought in that already has more recent experience at guard? So that, to me, puts even more on the plate of Evan Neal to say, hey, right now my focus is I want to win the right tackle job. But in the event I don't, how do they look at me as a swing tackle, and could I then carve out some type of an opportunity at guard? That to me is a lot more challenging than some of these other individuals that are already on the roster.
All right, final question on this topic, because I think it's interesting. I was listening to the PFFNL podcast the other day, and Sam Monson and Steve Palazzolo were making the case of why Joe Alt should still be a primary option for the Giants at 6th overall. And yes, Joe Alt would still be an option for me at 6th overall as well. But here's my reasoning why I don't think would make that pick. And it's not because I think either Illuminor or Evan Neal are, going to be long-term better right tackles than Joe Alt. That's not the reasoning. In my opinion, you get to that 6th pick, Joe Alt maybe is the top player on your board, but I think one of those 3 top wide receivers is, at least for me, either going to be slightly higher graded or at least right at the same level in terms of grade. And for me, at least, I think you have enough insurance in-house at right tackle to feel okay about it between Neal and Illuminor. You want to give Neal one more chance to earn that job. You have Illuminor as your fallback. And I just feel the need at wide receiver to have another explosive playmaker on offense in an offseason where Darren Waller's health and future is still up in the air, apparently.
Yeah.
And Saquon Barkley is no longer with the team, your most explosive weapon on offense. Since their grades and the level of the player is right on the same level, I'm going to lean towards wide receiver over offensive tackle just because I think the offense desperately needs it. And that's kind of where I land on it.
Well, I'll add another layer to this. If they did not have an answer at left tackle, John, my answer would be I'll take Joe Alt because I feel really good about his experience there in college.
1,000 times out of 1,000.
I'm putting him in the position he played in school. If you draft Joe Alt, regardless of the upside and how good you feel about him, you're going to put him in a position he did not play at college. I'd be worried about that, John. 6th overall pick, you want to draft the closest thing to a sure thing, not the closest thing to more questions.
It wouldn't stop me from making the pick, but I think it's a question you have about it that you don't have about any of the receivers that you'd be considering.
Yeah, Odunze, Neighbors, who cares whether you play him on the left side or the right side?
Or inside or outside. Put him anywhere you want.
The guy is an explosive playmaker. He's a talent. Something tells me he'll find ways to get open. So that would be another big part of why I'd go wide receiver playmaker over offensive lineman.
I'll throw one more in there, too. You just signed Andrew Thomas to an extension. When that extension's over, he'll be, 30 years old probably, give or take, something like that, 31. Yeah. That's young for an offensive tackle.
Oh, he's good for another contract.
One more big contract after that.
Yeah.
How many NFL teams, Lance, can you remember that have paid 2 offensive tackles at the same time, top of the market money? So if you draft Joe Alt and he works out and he hits, right, which is you're counting on, and he hits free agency in 5 years and he's asking for the Andrew Thomas contract, can you afford to pay 2 offensive tackles $55 to $60 million of your salary cap? Especially if at that point you're paying a quarterback money too, and you're paying Brian Burns money, and you're paying Dexter Lawrence money. Where are you paying a playmaker in that conversation? So I think with the way you put the roster together, I think it's hard to pay 2 really good offensive tackles at the same time. I feel much more comfortable allocating some money to an offensive tackle and then some money to a wide receiver, which, again, you would hope you're doing with whatever wide receiver you draft, that you're signing him to a big-time contract extension in 4 or 5 years. So I think from a team-building perspective, it makes more sense to go wide receiver, too, just because I think it's hard to have 2 $25+ million offensive tackles on your roster at any given time.
It's interesting. I didn't necessarily think about that item, John, only because I just wonder, is Joe Shane thinking that far ahead?
Probably not.
Given the fact that, Joe Alt's on a rookie contract, I'll wait 4 or 5 years. Plus, remember, you get the 5th-year option, too, with Joe Alt.
I can think that way. He's probably not.
And that's fine. You really took it to 75 layers away from what I was thinking. It's something that I'm sure maybe is a conversation piece.
It makes sense, though, right?
Well, of course.
You would hope in 5 years that Joe Alt and Andrew Thomas would
that's
still
the whole
be
point of drafting a guy, right? What do I always say? I say you want to draft a guy that warrants a second contract.
Correct.
Not a guy that warrants saying goodbye and go elsewhere. Defeats the purpose. So it's definitely something to take into consideration. And off the top of my head, you'd be hard-pressed, I agree, to find a team that invested that type of money on the bookends on the offensive line. More often than not, they have to let one of the guys walk. They sign somebody in free agency or they draft somebody. So that point is well taken. But in the Giants' position, I guess, and they're not in this position because, once again, Joe Alt gives me questions because you'd be putting him on the right side. But given the offensive line issues that they had, if a GM is saying, if I could get security on both edges for my quarterback, I don't know if you're too worried about the 5th-year option expiring, and now I got to pay the guy at the position that I already paid the left tackle. So maybe not as much stress.
And by the way, Andrew will only be 30 years old when his contract expires in 2029.
Well, it's a good problem to have.
It's a long ways off. So as a super big picture thing, I just like balancing the roster a little bit better by going after the wide receiver. Just food for thought as you consider what the Giants might do at number 6. Lance, this was fun. We've done
100%.
in a while. This is good.
Absolutely. Just real quick, there's a team that averaged 15 points a game last season. So you need a playmaker.
To our first caller's point, you gotta figure out a way to score more points, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to. I'm with you. For Lance Medow, I'm John Schmeelk. I am off Monday. It'll be, I believe, Lance and Paul on Monday, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
So tune in for that. Do you know what college team it is on top of your head?
UCLA, I know, is one of them. I did not look. I think it's two West Coast.
I think I put UCLA and USC
It
on
may
the
be
same
UCLA
show.
and USC. I think that sounds right.
I also put North Carolina and Duke on the same show, if I'm not mistaken.
Rivalry in basketball.
I'm trying to keep the rivalry
in football.
As best I can. All right, so have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll see you on Monday on Big Blue Kickoff Live.